Your uniform is a symbol of hate. You fascists deserve this. The shriek tore through the air as a can of red paint spun through the crisp November sky, bursting across the pristine dress blues of Master Gunnery Sergeant Eli Braxton, USMC, retired. 74 years old. Bronze stare. Spine like rebar. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply closed his eyes. For a breath. A heartbeat. The cold paint soaked into the fabric, trailing down like blood over metals that told stories of jungles, sandstorms, and brothers who never came home. A silence fell, heavier than the overcast clouds above Durham Veterans Memorial Park. The scent of gun oil, brass polish, and fresh-cut grass mingled with the copper tang of the paint. People froze, civilians, officials, veterans. Behind Eli, the color guard faltered, the stars and stripes quivering in uncertain hands. To Eli's left, a bugler lowered his horn mid-note. On the mayor's podium, the speech stuttered, then stopped. Time stretched. Children looked to their parents. A few teenagers laughed nervously. But most stood rooted, shocked, unsure, unnerved by the violent red slashed across the uniform that demanded reverence. The protester, a young man no older than Eli's grandsons, stood panting. Tattoos up his neck. Rage in his eyes. He held a second can, hand trembling, face twitching between defiance and disbelief. Eli opened his eyes. Calm. Unbroken. He looked not at his assailant, but to the flag, still rising in the slow, respectful climb of ceremony. He didn't say a word. Because Marines don't speak when disrespected. They remember. They endure. They answer in ways the world never forgets. Eli Braxton lived a life carved out of routine. Not habit. Habit was what civilians called it when they did things mindlessly. Routine was something else. Routine had honor. Purpose. It was the sacred scaffolding he built around himself after the war stripped everything else away. His apartment in Durham Heights, a modest one-bedroom on the third floor of a red brick complex tucked behind a faded strip mall, was more barracks than home. Tile floors scrubbed until they gleamed. A single bed with hospital corners you could bounce a quarter off. An oak bookshelf stacked with military histories, worn Bibles, and yellowed field manuals. No TV. No computer. He didn't need distractions. He needed structure. Each morning began at 0500, same as it had for 50 years. He would rise, silence draped around him like a well-worn blanket, and step into his slippers, lined in felt, regulation black. The first stop, the bathroom mirror. There, he'd stare at the man before him. Skin like leather. A jaw still sharp. Silver hair combed straight back. A face aged by sun, wind, and grief. He shaved dry, always dry, and cleaned the blade after every stroke. Then came coffee. 2 cups. One for himself. One placed on the kitchen table across from him, untouched, steaming quietly for the first 10 minutes of the day. It wasn't superstition. It was respect. An old ritual for someone who no longer sat there. Staff Sergeant Lenny Morse, Kia, Al-Anbar Province, 2004. They had shared the table when Morse visited in the summer before deployment. It had become Morse's cup ever since. Eli didn't speak to ghosts. He simply left them room. After breakfast, usually oatmeal or eggs, he turned to the flag. The one folded on his bedroom dresser. The one whose every edge was still sharp after years of perfect triangle creases. He would unfold it slowly, hands steady despite age, and place it in the window. It faced east. It caught the first light of morning and reminded the passing cars below that someone in that building still remembered. At 0700 sharp, he dressed. Camis if it was a normal day. But this was not a normal day. It was November 11th, Veterans Day. which meant the blues. He laid the uniform out on the bed like a relic, dark blue coat with red piping, sky blue trousers with the blood stripe down the seam, white gloves, polished brass, shoes like mirrors. He ironed the fabric with military precision, seams aligned, every thread in place. His decorations, 2 bronze stars, a Purple Heart, Navy Commendation Medal, Combat Action Ribbon, and a lifetime's worth of campaign pins, shone bright against the dark wool. On the dresser sat a framed photograph. Vietnam, 1971. 5 Marines shoulder to shoulder, squinting into the sun. Sweat slicked, rifle slung, cocky. Eli stood on the far right, taller than the others, his hand on the shoulder of Private Jimmy Cheeks Amarin. Cheeks was dead 3 weeks later, torn apart by shrapnel in the Mekong Delta. Next to that was a second photo. Iraq, 2004. Eli and Staff Sergeant Morse, arms slung around each other, grinning like they hadn't just buried 2 of their own the week before. Behind them, the tattered banner of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. Morse had stepped on an IED 6 weeks after that picture. Eli didn't wear the blues for pride. Or protest. Or politics. He wore them because they were the last honest thing he had. Because every stitch carried the memory of someone who never got to wear them home. He stepped out into the hallway just before 0830, the silence of the building broken only by the quiet click of his polished soles on old tile. Mrs. Green, his neighbor, peeked through the crack in her door, offered a small, respectful nod. She knew not to speak. Most did. Eli didn't demand silence. He just carried it with him like a flag. The walk to the Durham Veterans Memorial took 23 minutes if he cut through the alley behind Bell's Hardware. He always did. Along the way, he passed closed shops, old laundromats, a bakery that used to belong to a Korean War vet named Harold. People stepped aside for him. Children pointed. Some parents saluted. Some rolled their eyes. He acknowledged none of it. Just before entering the park, he stopped by the florist and picked up a single red rose. Every year. Same flower. Same reason. It was for the brothers. All of them. The ones with names on the granite wall, and the ones with names only he remembered. As he approached the memorial, he noticed the temporary barriers. Police tape. Volunteers in yellow vests. The crowd was larger this year. More cameras, more flags, more signs. Off to one side, a group of protesters gathered. Young. Loud. Colorful. Some held signs. No more blood for oil. War is murder. Uniforms don't make you right. Eli glanced once, then looked away. He'd seen protests before. Real ones. Saigon in 75. Baghdad in 03. He didn't mind dissent. Hell, he fought for it. What bothered him was forgetfulness. He walked to the wall, knelt, and laid the rose gently beneath the names. One gloved hand pressed to the granite. His lips moved in silence. Not a prayer. Just names. A few moments passed. A boy nearby pointed, whispered something to his father. Eli rose, adjusted his cover, and took his place near the flagpole, his back ramrod straight. The mayor began to speak in the distance, something about duty, sacrifice, remembrance. Eli heard none of it. His eyes were on the flag. The ceremony had begun. The nation was watching, even if it didn't know it yet. The air was thick with formality. Uniformed officers stood at parade rest, veterans stiff with memory and joint pain, civilians in their Sunday coats clutching little paper flags. The mayor of Durham, Cynthia Welch, stood behind a simple podium draped in red, white, and blue bunting. She was midway through a safe, polished speech, equal parts honorific and political, polished like a granite tombstone. Eli Braxton didn't hear most of it. His mind had long since tuned out the rhetoric. He stood by the front row, not behind the ropes where the public watched, but just beside the color guard, close enough to be part of the ceremony, yet alone. His gloved hands rested behind his back. His cover sat perfectly level on his head. His jaw was locked, eyes fixed ahead, unblinking. The high school band had just finished a slightly off-key rendition of "America the Beautiful." A Girl Scout troop prepared to hand out plastic poppies. Some parents were already looking at their phones. And then came the voice. Sharp. Uninvited. You should be ashamed. Heads turned. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. On the perimeter of the park, near the sycamores lining the sidewalk, a man in black stepped forward. Early 20s, lean, angry. His boots stomped over the grass, kicking up damp earth. A backpack hung loose on one shoulder. You stand here pretending you fought for freedom, he called, but all you did was carry out the orders of war criminals. Gasps. A few jeers. An older man in a Vietnam ball cap muttered, "Here we go again." The mayor faltered. "Sir, please. I'm not talking to you." His voice rose, sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm talking to him." The protesters' eyes locked on Eli. That gaze wasn't one of confusion or protest. It was personal. Laser-focused. Consumed. Eli didn't blink. "You," the young man growled, walking past the startled volunteers and ignoring the outstretched arms of a retired police officer. "You wear that uniform like it's holy. Like it doesn't drip with blood. You want to stand there like some hero while we pretend these wars weren't crimes?" A couple of Marines in the crowd tensed. A middle-aged woman pulled her daughter closer. The protester kept walking. "Tell me, Sergeant," he spat the word like a curse. "How many people did you kill for that Bronze Star? How many homes did you help bomb to earn that combat action ribbon? You wear those medals like jewelry, but they're soaked in the tears of every mother whose kid died for oil and empire." Security, 3 aging volunteers and 1 overweight off-duty deputy, moved toward him with hesitation. The protester turned sharply, pulled something from his backpack. Some in the crowd ducked. A scream rang out. But it wasn't a gun. It was a spray can. In one fluid motion, he yanked the cap off with his teeth and hurled it aside. The metal cylinder gleamed red. "Your medals," he shouted, "are lies." The can arced through the sky. A single, spinning blur of red against the dull gray clouds. It struck Eli square in the chest. Paint exploded across his uniform. The bright crimson streaked down his chest, over his ribbons and medals, over the eagle, globe, and anchor. The crowd gasped. Someone yelled for the police. The young man stood frozen, chest heaving, his fingers curled like claws, lips trembling with adrenaline and conviction. Eli didn't move. Didn't flinch. The paint dripped slowly, painting thick streaks across a chest full of memories and ghosts. A moment passed. Then 2. The mayor stood speechless, the mic still live. An aide scrambled to cut the feed. Children cried. A woman sobbed. But Eli remained a statue. The color guard wavered, unsure whether to break formation. The Marine bugler lowered his horn. A pair of veterans in the front row stood slowly, fists clenched, but unsure whether to intervene. And through it all, Eli's gaze didn't shift. He looked beyond the boy. Past the crowd. Toward the flag, still fluttering halfway up the pole in its solemn ascent. He closed his eyes. One breath. A heartbeat. The only sound was the paint dripping from his medals onto the frosted grass. The protester looked suddenly uncertain. His rage had landed. His strike had hit its mark. But there was no retaliation. No rebuttal. Only the unbearable silence of a man who refused to break. A murmur rippled through the gathering. More cameras came out. A few feet away, a teenager whispered, "Is he gonna hit him back?" Eli exhaled slowly. Then, with deliberate motion, he reached into the inside pocket of his paint-streaked coat. A soft click as a small object flipped open. A cell phone. Not a sleek, modern touchscreen, but a battered flip phone. Scuffed. Faded. Still functional. The protester hesitated. Took a step back. Eli lifted the phone to his ear. His other hand remained behind his back, gloved fingers interlaced, perfect posture preserved. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't shout. Didn't even look at the boy. Just a calm voice, steel under velvet. "This is Master Gunnery Sergeant Eli Braxton," he said. "Authentication Bravo Tango 6. A pause. I am invoking Code Red. Location, Durham Veterans Memorial. Assault on a Marine in uniform. Civil unrest likely. I request immediate support." The words weren't barked like orders. They were recited like scripture. The protester's jaw fell slightly open. His hand dropped the spray can. Somewhere on the other end of the line, a voice responded. Eli said nothing else. He closed the phone, slid it back into his coat, and finally turned to face his attacker. The look he gave wasn't hate. It was sorrow. Like a man looking at a gravestone that read the wrong name. He said nothing. Because some statements didn't need volume. They needed history. And that uniform, even desecrated, carried more of it than the boy could possibly know. The crowd didn't know what to do with silence that heavy. It hung over Durham Veterans Memorial Park like thick fog after artillery fire. Veterans stared. Civilians whispered. Children clutched their parents' legs, sensing the fracture in the air without understanding it. Someone's dog barked from the sidewalk and was quickly hushed. Eli stood motionless. Paint still dripped from his medals, slow, steady, crimson. A bead rolled off the edge of his bronze star and fell to the grass. The protester who had hurled the can backed away now, suddenly conscious of how quiet it had gotten. A few of his comrades had already slipped into the trees, their voices reduced to murmurs and retreating footsteps. The mayor's aide finally had the presence of mind to kill the microphone. The mayor herself was pale, wide-eyed, unsure whether to step down or attempt some salvaging gesture. Eli didn't look at her. Or anyone. His flip phone, still warm from the call, slid back into the inside breast pocket of his dress blues, now streaked in drying red. He adjusted his gloves as if preparing for a funeral. His breath steady. Across the park, the off-duty sheriff's deputy tried issuing commands to the protester, who now stood alone in the open, his face flushed with adrenaline, rage, maybe now even doubt. "Step back." "Hands visible," the deputy called, drawing his sidearm but not raising it. "Do it slow." The boy hesitated. Eli finally turned his head. Just slightly. His voice was soft but cut across the space like a blade. "He's not the problem," Eli said. "Not yet." Everyone froze again. It was the first time he had spoken since the attack. The deputy blinked. You sure?" He threw paint. "Not a punch. Not a grenade. Let's not escalate what's already disgraceful." The boy turned toward Eli, lips twitching, unsure whether to speak. Some piece of him had expected to be tackled, shouted down, maybe even struck. But Eli's stillness, his discipline, had robbed him of resolution. "What are you?" the protester finally blurted. "A machine?" Eli's eyes met his. Steady. Human. Immense. "I'm what's left," Eli said. When the noise dies down. At the edge of the park, a low whump-whump sound began to echo, far off but growing fast. People turned. Looked up. The sky above the city was beginning to split. Two AH-1Z Viper gunships appeared first, sharp as daggers in the morning light, slicing through the clouds low and slow. The rotors thundered like an ancient heart. They were close enough for onlookers to read the tail numbers. Gasps. Cameras raised. The mayor's jaw fell open. Then came the rest. A convoy of 7 MTVR troop transports pulled into the streets surrounding the park, tires crushing curbside leaves as uniformed Marines disembarked in precise pairs. Humvees blocked off cross streets with mathematical efficiency. Civilians backed away instinctively. Durham PD, previously passive, now looked like spectators at their own crime scene. From one of the MRAPs, a monster of metal and armor, a tall, square-jawed man emerged, his posture giving away his identity even before his collar did. Colonel Asa Devlin. Commanding Officer, 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit. Eli nodded once when he saw him. He didn't salute yet. Not until protocol demanded it. The colonel strode through the chaos like he owned gravity itself. Marines snapped to attention. One saluted without even realizing it. When he reached Eli, he stopped precisely 3 feet away. He did not ask what had happened. He had already seen enough. His eyes scanned the red streaks across Eli's dress blues. The ribbons. The faded flip phone. The boy standing 10 yards back, still stunned. Colonel Devlin gave a sharp, perfect salute. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Braxton," he said, loud enough for the entire park to hear, "on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I offer our highest respect and our unequivocal condemnation of the assault you endured." Eli returned the salute, slower but no less precise. "I wasn't asking for backup, Colonel," he said. "I was asking for respect." Devlin held his gaze. "You've earned both, Gunny." Nearby, the deputy lowered his weapon. The protester now looked even younger, the angles of his anger softening into something else, confusion, maybe even regret. More Marines moved into the park, but not aggressively. They didn't shout. Didn't brandish rifles. They formed a perimeter, visible but not oppressive. Presence, not pressure. The mayor stepped down from the podium, heels clicking nervously on the flagstone. "Colonel, I." Devlin held up one hand without looking at her. "Not now." She stopped. Eli turned back to the flagpole. The banner had reached its peak. Now, by schedule, it would begin to lower, half-mast in honor of the fallen. A bugler lifted his horn. "Let it play," Eli murmured. The bugler hesitated, then nodded and began to blow. Taps. The simple, mournful notes poured out across the crowd. Across the park. Across the shame and silence and static. No one moved. Even the protester lowered his head. The bugler hit the last note. A long, aching goodbye. The ceremony ended not with applause, but with stillness. Eli turned from the flag and walked toward the MRAP, Colonel Devlin falling into step beside him. No one dared stop him. No one said a word. The Marine who had stood his ground, drenched in red, adorned in memory, was done standing alone. And the world would remember it. The city of Durham had not seen Marines on its streets since the war bonds rallies of the 1940s. That morning, they returned, not with banners or cheers, but with boots, vehicles, and an ancient code that still walked upright in the bones of men like Eli Braxton. 8 minutes after his call, the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit arrived in force. The Viper gunships didn't linger, 2 precise flyovers to assert presence, then they hovered at low altitude on the edge of the skyline, watching. Their shadows passed across downtown buildings like wings of judgment. The MTVRs and Humvees, hardened from recent deployments, came in next, taking corners with geometric efficiency. One by one, they encircled the Durham Veterans Memorial Park, a perfect cordon. Pedestrians backed away, instinctively surrendering space. A young boy dropped his ice cream cone and didn't even cry. Within the park's borders, the quiet was absolute. The Marines disembarked swiftly. Not a word. Helmets on. Kevlar fastened. M4s slung but not raised. Their movements were clean and controlled, like the cracking of knuckles before a fight. Sergeant Elena Rivas, squad leader of 2nd Platoon, 1st Company, was the first to kneel by the desecrated lawn. Her eyes scanned the trajectory of the paint can, the grass where Eli had stood, the tremor in the crowd's collective breath. No one had ordered her to take notes. But Marines knew when history had just happened. In the center of the cordon, Colonel Asa Devlin remained beside Eli, speaking in hushed tones. Though the storm of arrival had passed, what followed was stranger, calm. Heavy. Anticipatory. The protester, still standing off to the side, found himself surrounded by consequence. A lance corporal stood 5 feet behind him, arms crossed, face like carved oak. The boy dropped his eyes. News vans that had been late to the scene screeched into place on the perimeter, reporters leaping out with hastily clipped microphones. They were kept behind barriers, but their cameras zoomed in like vultures. Eli stood at parade rest. The red paint had begun to darken into a dull maroon, but the metals it covered still gleamed beneath. Colonel Devlin gestured. A Marine approached, a corporal, barely 20, nervous, his uniform spotless. He carried a clean garment bag under one arm and a regulation cleaning kit in the other. "Sir," the corporal said, handing the bag to Devlin, as requested. Devlin turned to Eli. "The Corps sends its regards. New blues. Tailored to your last spec." Eli nodded once. "Didn't ask for them." "I know," Devlin said. "That's why it means more." Eli looked down at his current uniform, ruined but worn with the defiance of dignity. "This one's not done yet." Devlin cracked the faintest smile. "Understood." By then, the mayor had found her voice. Flanked by city aides and 2 councilmen, she cleared her throat and approached, careful not to step too close. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Braxton," she began, "please allow me to offer." Eli raised a gloved hand. Not rudely, not sharply. Just enough to stop her. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am," he said. "You owe them." He gestured behind him to the granite wall, to the list of names stretching out like a ledger of promises unkept. The mayor swallowed hard and nodded. Of course. By 09:30 hours, the protester had been escorted by local police, hands cuffed, but treated without force. Several Marines observed but did not interfere. His charges would later be upgraded: assault on a uniformed veteran during a federally sanctioned memorial event. Under a statute rarely invoked, it was a felony. Some called it excessive. Others called it overdue. The Marine Corps issued a statement within the hour. "The uniform is not a costume. It is not a prop. It is a covenant. An attack on one is an affront to all. The Marine Corps stands behind Master Gunnery Sergeant Braxton and all who wear the dress blues with honor." The city of Durham followed with its own resolution, condemning the assault and praising Braxton's composure. By 1000 hours, the park had transformed. Protest signs lay abandoned in the grass, like forgotten slogans. Folding chairs had been cleared. Flags realigned. Marines stood sentinel near the memorial wall. Tourists took photos quietly, almost reverently, uncertain if they were documenting a tragedy or a resurrection. At the far end of the cordon, a young Marine stood alone, holding the desecrated paint can in his gloved hands. He stared at it as if trying to understand something ancient written on its surface. "What should I do with this, Gunny?" he asked Eli as he approached. Eli looked at it for a moment. His eyes didn't narrow. He didn't frown. "Save it," he said. "Put it in the archive. People should remember the day they crossed a line." The young man nodded and walked away. Later, at precisely 1,100 hours, Eli finally accepted the garment bag from Devlin. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He walked with it over his shoulder toward the waiting MRAP, every footstep like punctuation. Civilians moved aside. Reporters said nothing. Inside the armored vehicle, an aide waited with hot coffee and silence. Eli set the garment bag down beside him. Looked out the tinted window at the flag still flying at half-staff. "Take me home," he said. The engine rumbled to life, and the Marines moved as one, vehicles pulling out, flanking like wolves falling into formation. As they departed, Durham fell still again. But not untouched. Something had shifted. Not just in the city, but in the way people would speak of the uniform. Of memory. Of sacrifice. Eli Braxton didn't leave in disgrace. He left carried by history. And the Corps walked with him. Durham had a way of swallowing scandal. It had weathered its share of headlines, civic corruption, election fraud, even a small riot outside a courthouse years back, but what happened on Veterans Day 2025 didn't fade like the rest. It sharpened in the national consciousness, calcified. It wasn't just local news. It became the news. By nightfall, the footage had already gone viral. A still image led the charge, a Marine in full dress blues standing unmoving, drenched in red, his ribbons defaced, his spine straight. Behind him, the flag just crested the pole, caught mid-flight. Some news outlets blurred the protester's face, others looped it with slow-motion dramatics. A few spun it into politics. But for the Corps, and for many watching, the narrative was clear before the first think piece dropped. They saw a man stand for something. And a country unsure how to feel about that. The next morning, Eli Braxton rose at 0500 as always. His apartment felt the same, though the silence carried an edge. The flag in the window was perfectly folded, exactly where he'd left it. He shaved, brewed his 2 cups of black coffee, one for him, one for the ghosts, and sat across the table as daylight leaked through the blinds. The new uniform hung inside the plastic garment bag now draped over the back of his kitchen chair. Tailored. Crisp. Untouched. He hadn't unzipped it yet. There were voicemails on his answering machine, 19, last he checked. Messages from people he hadn't spoken to in decades. Reporters. A few brass officers from his past. A nervous-sounding staffer from the governor's office. All left unanswered. Eli didn't care for fame. He'd seen too many Marines chewed up by its machinery. He sat there for 20 minutes, sipping his coffee and staring at the photo on the wall. Vietnam, 1971. 5 young faces, now 4 gone. Still smiling, even back then. His voice barely stirred the air when he said, "Told you I'd hold the line." By 0700, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find a young female Marine, Sergeant Lorna Phelps. Clean cut, no more than 24. Her eyes widened when she saw him. The real him. She looked like she'd rehearsed a speech, but forgot every word at the threshold. "Sir," she finally said, "I was instructed to deliver this." She handed him a small, leather-bound box. "Also, the commandant sends his regards." Eli accepted the box without a word. He motioned her inside, but she shook her head. "Orders are to respect your space. And you're quiet." He nodded. "Wise orders." She hesitated, her expression flickering between awe and sorrow. "Sir, what you did, it meant something." He held her gaze a moment. "It should have meant something long before me." She stood at attention, saluted crisply. "Yes, Master Gunnery Sergeant." He returned the salute slowly, then watched her walk away, her boots striking the hallway tile like a metronome echoing down time itself. He closed the door and sat with the box on his lap. Inside was a citation, an official commendation for extraordinary composure under public assault, symbolic preservation of dignity, and embodiment of the Marine Corps ethos. Below it, a single line added in handwriting, "Some salutes go far beyond protocol." Eli closed the box, placed it beneath the folded flag on the dresser, and finally unzipped the new blues. They were pristine, just like the old ones had been, before the red. At noon, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was the mayor herself. She didn't arrive with press or aides. No cameras. She stood on his doorstep like someone showing up for an overdue apology. When he opened the door, she straightened her jacket, bit her lip, and spoke first. "I didn't say the right thing, back at the memorial." Eli looked at her a long time. "No, ma'am. You didn't. I'd like to fix that. If I can." He stepped aside and let her in. They sat at the kitchen table. She glanced at the second cup of coffee still steaming across from him. "For someone else?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Always." She stared at the cup a moment. "You could have lashed out. You could have, well, most people would have done something." Eli shook his head. "Most people never served with ghosts." The mayor bowed her head. "There's going to be a bill," she said, after a pause. "We're pushing it through council. Local protections for veterans in uniform during public ceremonies. It'll match the federal statute. Symbolic, mostly. But maybe it's a start." Eli didn't reply. He just sipped his coffee. After a moment, he said, "Starts are only good if you finish, M." She nodded and stood to leave. But at the door, she turned. "The people need something to believe in again." "They don't need me," Eli said. "They need memory. And the discipline to carry it forward." That night, national broadcasts ran retrospectives on the incident. Former generals weighed in. Talk show panels debated symbolism versus reality. One news anchor, in a rare moment of sincerity, said, "Whatever you think of our past wars, one thing's clear, this man didn't flinch." Maybe that says more than we're ready to hear. In schools across the country, teachers used the image as a discussion prompt. In a small town in Kansas, a mother framed it and placed it next to her son's folded flag. At Camp Lejeune, boot recruits were shown the video as part of a new ethics module, Honor Under Fire. At the Durham VFW Post 1178, the story spread like fire on dry grass. They said Eli never once bragged about it. He didn't have to. But he came that Friday night, as always, in a clean set of blues, boots polished to a mirror, gloves tucked beneath his belt. When the young corporal, new to the post, nervous around legends, finally asked, "Gunny, what did it feel like?" Eli took a long breath. Looked around at the old bar, at the plaques, at the names etched into glass and wood. "Hurt," he said simply. "But not for me. For what we've forgotten." The corporal blinked. "Forgotten, sir?" Eli stood, adjusted his collar, and looked toward the wall of remembrance. For what uniforms used to mean. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He picked up a rag and started polishing the case of medals on the wall, one by one, like brushing dust off sacred names. And in that moment, among the silence and the shine, something very old was reforged. Still standing.